Town Hall with Democratic Senator Joe Cervantes. Joe is a candidate in the 2018 race for governor and will be answering your questions for the next hour. As the night moves along, type any questions or comments you have for Joe in the comments section below. Joe, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you are running for governor of New Mexico?
Well, New Mexico today is adrift. After 8 years of a lack of leadership at the governor's office, we see the results. We see the deplorable standings compared to other states, and we see the lack of progress in our own state. I'm running for governor because I believe that the opportunity to change New Mexico resides upstairs on the 4th floor of the Capitol in the governor's office. And I believe that among the other candidates running for office, I can go into that office on the first day with a better experience, the courage, and the work ethic that will get New Mexico back to work and moving again.
Thanks, Joe. So we're going to start first with a question about the economy. This question is from Doug. As an ex-state employee for Tax and Rev, there's so much that's happening in the state that's losing major revenue. How are you going to help the state's economy grow?
Doug, what's been happening is that New Mexico has been cutting tax breaks and providing for deductions and credits to various businesses in the idea that that's going to create economic development and opportunities in New Mexico, and we've seen that hasn't worked. In fact, I voted against the governor's corporate tax cuts for big businesses because I knew exactly what would happen, and it has, which is we've cut a hole in our budget and in our we've created deficits in our state rather than bringing new jobs as was promised by those kind of corporate tax cuts. It's the same misguided agenda that we see happening in Washington, D.C., the idea that if we cut corporate taxes, businesses are going to come to New Mexico. And the fact of the matter is that doesn't work. So what we need to do from your own experience is we need to reevaluate those tax credits, those tax breaks, and try and find out what may be working, but frankly, eliminate most of those tax credits and tax cuts so that everybody's paying their fair share of taxes in New Mexico.
This next question is about a very specific industry in New Mexico. Joe, are you in favor of continuing New Mexico film tax credits?
Absolutely. And here again is a good example of what happens when you elect a governor who frankly doesn't know the job, doesn't have the experience in state government, and we have a number of people that are running for office as outsiders who don't have that background. When Governor Martinez came into office, she was very critical of New Mexico's film industry and film tax credits. Fortunately, over the 8 years of her administration and time, she's learned the important value that the film industry plays in New Mexico. And this is one great example of where a clean economy, clean jobs, well-paid jobs with good benefits has been brought to New Mexico and continues to grow and show great promise in our state. We should be reinvesting at a greater level in the film industry. It's a great promise for our future, to provide jobs for our young people, to increase the opportunities in college education and programs, and frankly, again, to bring in the types of jobs and the type of economy that we need to see as part of New Mexico's future.
Thanks, Joe. So this next question actually moves on to campaign reform. This is from Sheila, and Sheila would like to know, where do you stand on having the state put pressure on Congress to pass an amendment to get big money out of politics?
Well, Sheila, thank you for the question. I think you've touched on an important point, which is really one of the most important things that's wrong with politics today and our government here in Santa Fe, and even more so in Washington, is the role that money plays in the process. Today, even in our governor's race, people assume that the race belongs to those who can raise the most money from out of state. And in fact, we saw that in this last administration, where large corporate donors from out of state, principally Texas and elsewhere, invested in New Mexico, paid for a campaign, paid for a governor, and then very frankly expected a return on that investment. We see the same thing happening in Washington, D.C. with our Congress people who trade their vote and their influence for very large campaign contributions and donors. We've got to get money out of the political process. And we've learned, if nothing else, that there is no correlation between the ability to raise money and, frankly, the ability to lead. Governor Martinez was able to set records in her fundraising ability as a candidate for governor, and yet came into office without the skill, the experience, and frankly, the ability to work together with legislators and other people to move New Mexico ahead. And so there is no relationship between the ability to raise money and amass contributions from big donors and the ability to bring people together and get New Mexico where it needs to be going. The next governor ought to be working with our representatives in Washington to try and change the Supreme Court attitude toward campaign contributions and the idea that money should determine who we elect to office in New Mexico.
Thanks, Joe. So this next question actually comes from our comments section. This is from Zach, and he asks, on the subject of big money and clean, sustainable jobs, will you pledge not to take money from oil and gas corporations or the pharmaceutical industry?
Well, Zach, I have the opportunity to show you my record here in New Mexico as a longtime House and Senate member. And you can look back and you can do the research on where I've received my campaign contributions in the past to know that I don't accept and don't rely upon those contributions for influence here in New Mexico. And so I couldn't begin to tell you, frankly, who's given me money from any particular industry because I don't look at those contributions as a way to influence my vote. So frankly, I don't know about pharmaceutical contributions to my campaign or anyone who has relied upon any of those contributions to try and expect any help from me on the basis of those contributions. And so again, to my point, we've got to get money out of the process. We've got to get beyond the idea that raising money is how we decide who we're going to elect as a candidate for office. It's proven disastrous nationally. It's proven disastrous in Washington, D.C. It's not the type of government that the founders of our country and our state envisioned, that the idea that the person who has the most money or raises the most money is the type of leader that we deserve and need in New Mexico.
Thanks, Joe. So this next question is also from our comment section, and this is from Sarah. What do you think can be done to decrease the wait list for those on the developmental disabilities waiver?
Well, the fundamental problem that we have with the people on the wait list is that we're not paying for the government that we expect in New Mexico. And so for the last 8 years, the governor has held the line and indicated that she would not consider any way to replace oil and gas revenues that we lost. And as a consequence, the government and the legislature was compelled to cut programs and cut the needs of important services like developmental disability. And so in this case, we have people who are waiting a very long time, people in great need, families, elderly, children, who are not getting the services that our state had promised them in the past, the services they had received from the state in the past. And frankly, people have suffered as a result of that. As the next governor of New Mexico, I intend to pay for the government that we deserve instead of continuing to kick the can down the road, borrowing money against our children and our future. And rather, we need to decide that we're going to pay for the government that we want. And that includes taking care of the most vulnerable and needy in our society.
Let's get right into it with Paul's question. What do you feel is the most important distinction that makes you the best candidate to face off in the general election?
Well, thanks for the question. There are 3 reasons that I like to emphasize when I get a chance to talk to people like I am tonight with you. The first one is I'm not going to promise you any quick results and easy fixes. The second reason is because I have the experience that none of the other candidates running for governor have to get to work right away. And the third is because I'm prepared to make courageous decisions as a governor that the next governor is going to need from our state. So let me expand on those just a little bit with the first answer. You have candidates running for this office who have quick fixes, easy solutions. And frankly, those of us that have served for a period of time in elective office here in the state know those solutions because we hear them every session. They're bounced around, they're introduced, and then they're very frankly, very quickly dismissed. There are no quick solutions, there are no easy fixes, and there are no magic bullets to New Mexico's problems. It took us a long time to get into this problem. It took us the last 8 years of indirection and adrift leadership. It's not going to happen in the first week, and it's certainly not going to happen by quickly just going into easy solutions and sound bites to try and solve our state's problems. The second is because, again, I'm a farmer from southern New Mexico. I grew up working hard on the farm. I believe in hard work, and I believe there's no substitute for rolling up our sleeves and going to work. And it's not going to be easy, and it's going to take that type of dedication to hard work to getting us out of the problems we're in. And the third point that I like to distinguish myself from my other candidates, fellow candidates in this race, is the courage that it's going to take from the next governor to do the right thing. The fact of the matter is I'm not looking to rise any ladder. I have a great career, a great profession, and wonderful opportunities in my existing life, and I'm not looking for this because I need a job. The bottom line is that the next governor shouldn't be looking to the governor's office as a stepping stone to higher office. I think too often that's been the problem in New Mexico for the last 3 administrations. The governor has come in and very promptly wanted to be talking about running for higher office. New Mexicans deserve a governor who wants to come in and do this job and not be looking to rise up politically or see this as a stepping stone.
Thanks, Joe. So let's ask a question about education. How does early education fit into your platform?
Well, Jennifer and I have raised 3 daughters, and so we know from that experience the importance of getting an early start for all of our students and all the people in New Mexico. And we also know in New Mexico that too many children don't get that early start that they need. They don't come to school prepared to learn. They don't have the early education that's important so that when they get to school, they're ready to catch up or learn with their other students that are their same age group. So New Mexico has been talking for quite some time, importantly, and made some progress in the areas of kindergarten, early kindergarten, full day kindergarten. But we need to be able to expand those opportunities around the state, particularly in rural and remote parts of the state, but really throughout our entire population, make sure that those early education programs are available, and frankly, that the services that parents need early in the raising of their children are available to them. New Mexicans are coming to school too early an age without that background, and we're putting it upon teachers to try and make up for that lack of preparation for our schools, and we can't continue to do and afford that. And so I support the education initiatives and the opportunities for parents to have their kids in school earlier. By the time they get to grade school, they're ready to start learning at that level.
Thanks. We've actually got another question about education. So this is from Cami. Joe, do you plan to raise teachers' salaries as the next governor of New Mexico?
Yes, I do. And more important than just making that commitment to you, I hope you'll realize that you can go in my office, unlike the other candidates running for this office, you can check out my record. You can see what I've done in the legislature, including this session, where I proposed raising teacher salaries. But in return, also expecting something more from teachers in return. One of my initiatives is to expand what we call K3 Plus in New Mexico. K3 Plus now exists and shows great results for many of our students who we've identified as needing greater opportunities in school. And what K3 Plus means is that children spend more days in the school year in school. We add 20 days to the school year in those K3 Plus schools where students are demonstrating a greater need, and we've seen results from those programs. One of my education initiatives, as I've introduced in legislation here in the state for years past, is to expand what we know works in New Mexico to all schools and to all students, and not just make those programs available to the students and the schools that are showing the greatest need. We know what works here in Santa Fe. We just need to do more of the things that work and, frankly, turn away from the things that we know doesn't work. The hours that are spent testing needlessly, the time that is spent battling between teachers and administration and courtroom battles between the state and faculty and educators. These are that sap our resources, our time, our energy, and we need to be putting ourselves to a better purpose.
So let's do one more question on education before we move on. This one is from Antoinette. How do you feel about the teacher evaluation system?
Well, first of all, Antoinette and others, I appreciate the fact that we're getting so many questions on education. It's important for folks tonight to understand that really as much as half, if not 2/3 of our state budget goes to education. You include higher education in our funding process. And in the last couple of years, we've passed a budget here in Santa Fe in the House, which will now come to the Senate to work on. And I'll tell you that of the candidates running for office, I'll be the only one in the Democratic ticket who's ever a state budget, balanced a state budget, and worked on a state budget. So with regard to teacher salaries and compensation, as I said earlier, we need to begin by to recognize that teachers in New Mexico are underpaid. The part of the state that I come from, for example, in southern New Mexico, the district I represent is across the street from the state of Texas. It's literally across the street in Anthony. We're not able to keep good teachers in New Mexico because too many of them are attracted into Texas. The other thing we need to be doing, frankly, is we need to be educating and graduating teachers from our colleges. Because of the acrimonious relationship that's been established between this administration and the teaching profession, we have too many young people who aren't willing to go into teaching, who aren't willing to endure the hardship of, frankly, being blamed for many things that are the responsibility of all of us as a state. And so I think that if we recognize the importance of teaching as a profession, and we pay teachers what they need to be with other states and with other jobs and opportunities in our states, we're going to get a better teaching profession as a result of that.
Thanks, Joe. We were going to move on from education, but Ethan just asked, Can we ask the real education question? Aggies or Lobos?
Well, I appreciate some levity tonight, and it's going to be great to visit with you about things that are a little lighter during the night. I'm a two-time UNM Lobo graduate. I went to University of New Mexico and studied architecture as an undergraduate, received my first degree from UNM in architecture. Later, after graduate school in architecture, I later in life came back to UNM to study law. And so I have a law degree from the University of New Mexico. But I've got to tell you, my wife Jennifer is a graduate of New Mexico State University, and after we were married, she received 2 of her degrees from there. So we're a divided household. I'll also want you to know I have 2 daughters at the University of New Mexico, now attending college there, who Jennifer and I are both proud of. And so I'm very partial to UNM in most cases, but I've got to tell you, when the Lobos are down in Las Cruces and playing our Aggies, I root for the hometown team.
Great. So let's move on to a question about the environment. Joe, what are your plans to protect the environment and ensure that we have clean air and sustainable water access?
Well, one thing that will distinguish me from the other candidates running for office is that I've been entrusted by my colleagues in the Senate with exactly the protection of our air and water. So I've been appointed in my second term in the Senate to be the chairman of the Conservation Committee. And the Conservation Committee is the committee here in Santa Fe that is responsible for protecting our air and water. I think my colleagues in the leadership in the legislature have asked me to fulfill this role because they recognize that I know, as a farmer from southern New Mexico, the importance of water, the importance of air, and the importance of our environment. That as farmers, we're stewards of this land, the same stewards that my grandparents were and my parents were before me. And so I have that in my heart and my soul, the need to protect our state natural resources. I would want you to know that our farm is on the bank and the edge of the Rio Grande River. The Rio Grande River literally flows alongside our farm. And I've got to tell you that as much as 7 or 8 months of the year, that river is dry. It's a daily reminder to me the importance of protecting our environment and safeguarding all of our resources, air and water both. But I'll tell you, as the chairman of the Conservation Committee, I've got to believe my colleagues put me here because they know that I'll fulfill the role. And I'll tell you, this Saturday, importantly, we'll be hearing an important piece of legislation, probably the most important piece of legislation this session, which relates to the shutdown of the coal generating plants in the San Juan part of the state to address our climate change and other climate-related issues that are coming from the carbon emissions from those type of plants. And so we'll be talking about how we do that and how we make transition to renewable energy here in New Mexico. That'll be important on Saturday here in Santa Fe, and I hope many of you all will get a chance to come join us. I'll be chairing that meeting, and I'll be making the challenge, frankly, of the important balance between converting from coal and a coal economy to renewable and natural resources. And it's a great challenge, and it's one I embrace.
Thanks, Joe. So this next question is from Megan. Exactly what bills have you proposed and passed in your political career that show how you personally have changed our state? If you maybe just want to highlight some of the legislation that you're most proud of.
Well, we could talk a long time about that, but I'm going to talk about a couple when I get a chance to visit with people like I do tonight. You know, when I came to Santa Fe, what used to happen here was the House would pass one version of our state budget, the most important job we have. The Senate would pass an entirely different budget, and they would do that on purpose, just like we see Washington playing these games with health care or tax reform. And then what would happen is, because each of the 2 chambers, the House and the Senate, would pass 2 different versions of a bill, they would meet in secret in what's called a conference committee, and 6 people would draft the ultimate version of our state budget. It would be done in secret on the last night, and members were not allowed to participate and know the scoring and the numbers that they ultimately voted upon. Now, that should sound familiar to you. That's what Washington, D.C. has been doing in the last few months on healthcare and tax reform. I wasn't happy about the fact that our budget was being done in secret, and so I did something that people said couldn't be done. I passed legislation to require that all of our legislative processes, all of our committees, and including the entire process, is going to be done in public. I was opposed by the leadership House. I was opposed by the leadership from the Senate. I was opposed by Democrat leadership, and I was opposed by Republican leadership. Because very frankly, they liked passing with 6 individuals and doing so in secret. But I did that a long time ago, and frankly, now we do it an entirely different way. I've worked on impeachment of elected officials and chaired those committees when I've been asked to. I passed the constitutional amendment to require greater qualifications from PRC members. I passed the laws to protect whistleblowers in our state. The Whistleblower Protection Act is a bill I authored, and this encourages people to come forward with knowledge of abuse and waste in government. And then I passed the Fraud Against Taxpayers Act, a bill that has brought back tens of millions of dollars to our state that was improperly paid to Wall Street insiders to place investments in our state. I could go on at great length, but I've been a reformer and a fighter in Santa Fe. The fact of the matter is, I've taken it as far as I can as a state senator because I believe there are greater opportunities to do so now as your governor.
Thanks. So let's expand on that just a little bit with a question from Arnie. Given the political corruption in various smaller communities throughout the state, what would you propose to counteract corrupt politicians that would be proactive rather than reactive?
Well, I mentioned a moment ago the Whistleblower Protection Act, and I'll just give you a little bit more background on that. When I came to Santa Fe, we had something called the Housing Authority, and the Housing Authority was intended, frankly, to provide a means for people to have home ownership in starting homes for people that had limited resources. That was the purpose of the Housing Authority. In fact, what happened was people that were managing those funds were abusing those funds. They were going to Las Vegas on expensive trips. They were spending money on personal property. And frankly, the money was being spent. And we had people that were living in what were supposed to be housing projects or housing opportunities who frankly were earning very large salaries at the same time they were taking advantage of these programs. I wasn't happy with this, but I'll tell you that one of the members of that board came to me. And she was from Doña Ana County. Her name is Frances Williams, and you can watch the video on our webpage, and I hope you will. Frances came to me and told me about the abuse. She told me she had gone to the governor, received no response. She told me she had gone to the lieutenant governor and received no response. She told me she had gone to the attorney general and received no response. And when she told me her story, I conducted 2 hearings. We passed legislation to change the way the Housing Authority was done, and most important, I passed legislation to protect people like Frances Williams who could come forward with their stories of abuse. Since that time, you can do the research. There have been multiple lawsuits filed in small communities around our state, school districts and otherwise, who have relied upon the Whistleblower Protection Act, a law that protects whistleblowers to come forward with knowledge when they have it about abuse in New Mexico. And it has helped eliminate a lot of the corruption and fraud in our state when, frankly, elected officials wouldn't do the job they were elected to do.
Thanks, Joe. So we're going to take a question from Jerry, and then after that, we'll come back to some more questions about education. So this question is about the state's infrastructure. Will you set priorities on fixing our state's infrastructure? And where will you get that money?
So this is a terrific question, and it's one of the most important planks of my candidacy for governor. One of the things that New Mexico consistently ranked low on, and most people in the public don't follow or pay much attention to, is what is called capital outlay. This is how we take a large pool of money every year and divide that for projects, buildings, roads, and other capital improvements in our state. Historically, what happens is the governor takes 1/3 of that money, the Senate takes 1/3 of that money, the House takes 1/3 of that money, and then it's divvied up among the members in each of those 2 chambers. As a result of those inefficiencies and the fact that we never have enough money to get a project done or move it ahead fast enough, and by the time we do accumulate enough money to make a project happen, the price has changed and risen. As a result of all of these failings in this process, in this system, we have $1 billion in New Mexico right now of capital outlay monies that has been appropriated, bonded, and we pay interest on, and the projects remain stalled because we can't get them through the administration, we can't get them through the Santa Fe bureaucracy, and very frankly, when they were funded and appropriated, they may not have been ready to go. So to answer your question, one of the most important planks of my platform for governor is to get that $1 billion to work. And I've been working on that for the last 2 years in Santa Fe, but it's going to take a governor to make it happen. And if we do this, there's $1 billion that can be freed up promptly, if not in the first year, certainly in the first 2 years of the next administration. That $1 billion will put a lot of New Mexicans to work, and most important, it'll mean buildings, roads, other facilities, playgrounds, and other great opportunities for a lot of New Mexicans. There's no excuse for the fact that that $1 billion is stranded in Santa Fe, and we need to shake it with a governor who understands how to do so.
So Max asked a question earlier. We had briefly talked about teachers' salaries, but Max says he actually left teaching due to pay, and he wants to know what type of pay you will fight for teachers at all levels.
So Max, we need you back. And I'll tell you that as a father, again, with 3 daughters, I've got to tell folks on the campaign trail, our daughters, mine and Jennifer's daughters, received an exceptional education in the Las Cruces Public Schools. And I hope some of their teachers are watching tonight, because I want to tell you that you did a terrific job with our daughters. But the fact of the matter is that too many New Mexico children don't have the same opportunities that daughters did in Cruces Public Schools with those exceptional teachers. And the reason for that is that we've lost too many teachers who are exceptional at what they do. We've lost them because they felt put upon, because they felt that they're being blamed. They felt that there's an acrimonious or adversarial relationship between the state and the government and them and their role as teachers. And so we repair that by better pay, and we do so by looking at competitive occupations and competitive salaries paid to teachers in other states. But more important, we bring exceptional teachers like you, Max, back to the profession by recognizing that it's not for you always about the pay. You know, I've been in a small business employer for about 30 years. I've got employees who have worked with me for well over several decades. And I've learned along the way that paying them and treating them right and their compensation, their benefits is important, but more important than that, feeling part of something that's important, taking care of the clients that we take care of in our law firm, winning cases and protecting people, fighting big corporations and winning against multinational corporations in New Mexico courts. It's about feeling like you're part of something more important, and I believe most teachers want to feel that way. And they need to know that they're respected, both in their compensation, but more important, by the way that they're treated and evaluated in New Mexico. And I hope we can bring you back as a teacher, because our students need you.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So this next question is actually quite pertinent to the evening. What can you do to improve the state's broadband infrastructure?
Well, it's a great question. It's timely. I'll talk to you as a lawyer in a moment, but I'll tell you that this last session in 2017, the legislature passed legislation to expand broadband access around the state and to fund it. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that legislation to expand broadband around the state. But fortunately for us as New Mexicans, the governor did it wrong. And so despite 7 years in office, the governor had not yet learned the job of how to properly veto a bill. And so because she did not include a message with her veto of the broadband legislation, those of us in the legislature who knew that she had vetoed that bill improperly challenged her in court. The fact of the matter is the courts have sided with the legislature, found that the governor's veto of the broadband legislation was improper. And so right now, although the governor has challenged this all the way to the Supreme Court, the fact of the matter is that this reflects the importance of electing a governor who understands the job, who knows from day one how to veto a bill when they need to, but more important, how to work with the legislature and not get into a situation where we're suing one another in court. The fact of the matter is that we passed the legislation to do this. The courts have sided the governor's veto was improper, and I'm confident that's going to be upheld, and we're going to get more broadband around the state as a result of the governor's misstep, and frankly, the legislature's own on the issue of broadband.
Thanks, Joe. So Karen has a question about some of the choices you'll make when you're governor. She says, could you describe the qualities you would look for in a PED secretary and the department that that person would lead?
Well, I appreciate again the question about education. So let's be clear. Governor Martinez fought for about the first 6 or 7 years of her administration to defend her appointment of a cabinet secretary who arguably did not meet the minimum qualification for that position under our state constitution. And because of that appointment and because of that debate, the Senate for many years debated and held confirmation of that appointment. Again, because there was a question whether the appointee met the constitutional requirement. Constitutional requirement is that our cabinet secretary of education is somebody who has teaching experience, somebody who's been in the classroom, who's taught children. And the last cabinet secretary appointed by this governor did not meet those qualifications. It was for that reason that I voted against confirming the last cabinet appointee of Governor Martinez, because she did not meet, in my minimum qualifications. But what I would want you to know is that as governor, there's not going to be a question whether the appointees that I make to any cabinet position meet the minimum qualifications. In fact, I intend to appoint cabinet members who meet exceptional qualifications and will be recognized as leaders in their respective field, whether it's education or any of the other important parts of our state government. In a Cervantes administration, you're not going to wonder whether my cabinet appointee, the cabinet secretary of education, is a minimum qualified appointee, but rather you'll know that the person I appoint will be a leader respected among educators and by legislators in all parts of our state.
So this next question actually moves on to an issue that's going on at a national level. The opioid epidemic is a national crisis. How will you address that problem in New Mexico?
Well, first of all, we should recognize that it is a national problem. And so I want to support those who are looking at the drug companies who, frankly, have been contributing to the problem and making the drugs available in ways they should not. I think we need to begin to involve the healthcare community in the discussion and dialogue about the abuse and help them to recognize that they need to be an important part of prescribing these medications and recognizing abuse and being more strict in the ways that they make these drugs available and put them out in the street for abuse. But most important to all of these things, we need to provide the opportunity for people who know they're in trouble, that they're abusing these drugs. We need to provide the opportunity for them to get help. They shouldn't have to drive to Albuquerque or Los Angeles or remote parts of our state, drive hours to get help, because we know that won't work. They need to have the support of their own communities. They need to have the support of healthcare providers, and they need to be able to come in and ask for the type of help that New Mexico wants to provide for them to get them off of these drugs. I'll just tell you that we see this problem throughout our economy because we have the highest unemployment rate in our country, in part because too many people can't qualify for jobs because they can't simply pass a drug test. And so whether it's abuse of opioids or other drugs in Mexico, there are people who should be working in our state that want to work in our state and frankly can't get to work because they can't pass a basic drug test. And so our drug epidemic in the state of New Mexico is something that's tied to our economic development, to our education, to our unemployment rate, and we need to realize that that's going to take an investment from all of us to change that pattern and that problem in our state.
That actually leads to a question from Max. So we have the second highest unemployment rate in the country. So what would your plan be to get better jobs in New Mexico, and where can we see that plan?
Yeah. So Max, you probably are more up to date than I am. I think I may have said we've got the highest unemployment rate in the country, maybe the second bottom, but New Mexico can never be in the position of compared to the worst or the last place in our country for unemployment. And so we need to recognize that New Mexicans need to get back to work, and that's the theme of our campaign is let's get back to work. Let's put New Mexicans to work, and more important than jobs, opportunities, the opportunity to advance, to do better, to get better wages, to know that you can climb and find better jobs by the work ethic that I believe is important here in New Mexico. How do I intend to do it? I rely upon my experience as a small business owner. For over 30 years, we've created jobs. We've hired hundreds of people in southern New Mexico, and we've done it by all successful businesses do. We realize and capitalize on what we have to offer. So, for example, in New Mexico, we have a great opportunity by our proximity to the Mexico border. We have great economic opportunities that are happening in Santa Teresa, New Mexico, where frankly, New Mexico is leading in terms of job creation, economic and border infrastructure, and economic development. And so very frankly, we need to be capitalizing on those economic opportunities here in New Mexico with our job and taking my experience to frankly take advantage of what is best in New Mexico. And that means things like our small businesses who we know are not going to be moving around the country and chasing the latest tax break, which frankly has been the misguided approach of this administration, is trying to bring in big businesses from out of state by tax breaks and tax benefits that very frankly then mean other states and other countries will then be trying to attract them away from New Mexico. Same tax breaks and other benefits that frankly we don't want to be chasing after other countries and states. Let's invest in New Mexico small businesses. Let's invest in the people that are here in our state that we know are not going to be going anywhere and keep them here and make them successful.
So this next question is from Cami, and she would like to ask, will teachers get to spend less time testing and more time teaching?
Yes, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about that story. One of the tests that you're probably referring to is what's referred to as the PARCC test. This administration has pressed the PARCC test for a number of years. It's led to student walkouts, teacher protests, and very frankly, we decide to pay teachers based on the performance of their students on this PARCC test. Now let me tell you a quick story. I'm very proud of my wife, Jennifer. She's a very successful author, and one of Jennifer's early books was frankly used on the PARCC test. Unbeknownst to her, they used excerpts from the book on the PARCC test and asked students about what the author may have been intending or thinking in the author's writing of that particular test. And Jennifer found out her book was being used for the PARCC test and pulled up the questions and realized that the answers PARCC test scores were given to the on that test were the wrong answers for her. In other words, the people that were writing the test were ascribing to Jennifer attitudes toward the characters or of the author that were not her as the author of that passage itself. It's an interesting story, but it gives us an idea of really what's wrong with our testing in New Mexico. And so very frankly, yes, our students and our teachers are spending too much time testing. It, again, is a silver bullet approach to trying to solve our educational problems. We're not going to solve our problems by testing students. We're not going to solve our problems by, frankly, demoralizing teachers by test scores or by grading schools and closing schools that score poorly as C or D or F graded schools. The fact of the matter is, nobody in Santa Fe believes those test scores have a basis. Nobody understands how they're scored, and most people consider them to be very subjective. And so we need to get teachers back to teaching. We need to make teachers feel that what they're doing is not always subject to some scoring or arbitrary testing process. And yes, I want our teachers and our students to have the same experience I had growing up, which was loving learning in the classroom and having teachers who enjoy what they're teaching, not administering tests day after day and week after week in our schools.
Just to follow up with that, Megan asks, which test would you replace the PARCC test with?
Well, I don't know the answer to that one. I wish I did, but I don't have a clear idea in my mind which test to use, although I will tell you that the PARCC test is now increasingly disfavored at a time when as many as 40 states around the country use the PARCC test. The fact is that now less than about a half a dozen use that test in our country. I think it's important for New Mexicans to realize that, again, as we talked about earlier in the evening, this is oftentimes all about the money. In this particular case, the PARCC test was being pushed on New Mexico by the company that makes the test, the company that sells the test, and very frankly, the Secretary of Education here in New Mexico was a participant in that company that sold the test, marketed the test, and that New Mexico then used to test our students in New Mexico. So we got to get money out of the process. And again, I would be looking for a test that's not based on who gave money to which campaign, or who has which cabinet secretary on their board, or which cabinet secretary is relying upon those relationships to the people who write the tests and sell the tests to the state of New Mexico. I'd be looking for somebody who writes a test that recognizes New Mexico's unique place in our country, our unique heritage, our unique culture, people who write a test that recognizes and is not afraid to discuss our history that, frankly, some people in Washington, D.C. don't want to talk about. People that will write a test that will recognize things like climate change and part of our history, like our civil rights movement, that people would intend to write out of our testing curriculum here in New Mexico. And so, frankly, even in this last year, we had to fight the public education under this administration who didn't want to talk about climate change in our curriculum. They didn't want to talk about Rosa Parks and civil rights in our curriculum. We need to be part of a testing and part of a curriculum that reflects who we are as New Mexicans and proud of our history, not afraid of it.
So this next question is from Max. Max says, one of your opponents' plan is to create 225 new jobs. What are you able to create?
Well, first of all, I talked earlier in the night about silver bullets and magic solutions to our state problems. Look, the President of the United States ran on an agenda that he would build the southern wall to Mexico and Mexico would pay for it. In politics, people can say all kinds of things, but frankly, the idea of creating that number has been the subject of quite a bit of newspaper stories debunking the plan itself and, frankly, the numbers that are being thrown around as a promise that can't be, frankly, met in New Mexico. The fact of the matter is that that plan that's being proposed by one of the other candidates for governor is to take money from the Land Grant Permanent Fund and to use it to invest in infrastructure and jobs in New Mexico. And very frankly, again, if you were to do the research, you'd realize that that plan's not being adopted by anybody in Santa Fe. It's not going to be adopted by anybody in Santa Fe because, frankly, it's not allowed by New Mexico law. The Land Grant Permanent Fund is used and specifically directed for education in New Mexico. It is invested fully in creating funds for New Mexico education. It's invested in various places, including other states and Wall Street. But it's done with the idea of maximizing the return on that investment because, frankly, that funds about a third of our public schools in New Mexico. And so the idea of taking that money and using it for purposes which would be unlawful under our state constitution, and frankly, would require an act of Congress to change is not a reasonable solution, and is not the type of solution Mexicans can rely upon. We need a governor who's going to offer real solutions, not fictitious promises like having Mexico.
So to follow up on that, we have a question. How will you encourage and help to grow New Mexico companies and potential startups?
Well, it's a great question because, as I said earlier, New Mexico's future relies upon small business. And what we need to recognize is there are certain small businesses in New Mexico that are not going to go anywhere. I'll just take our farm as an example. We're a fourth generation farming family. We're not going to pack up and move to any other state based on a tax incentive. We're invested in New Mexico, and this is where our home is. This is where we stay. We need to be looking for those types of businesses in New Mexico that are going to stay here. And so, for example, this morning, I worked on legislation that relates to tourism here in New Mexico. We talked earlier in the night about the film industry. These are businesses that must be in Mexico, that a film industry is here not because of necessarily just the tax incentives. They're here because of the job opportunities that we provide people. They're here because of our beautiful scenery, our landscape, our clean air and water, and frankly, because we have a well-trained workforce here in New Mexico who has the skills that are needed by that industry. And so whether it's the film industry, tourism, farming, and even in New Mexico, renewable energy as an important possibility in our state, these are investments in jobs and economic opportunities that are going to stay in New Mexico. We're not going to take renewable energy jobs someplace else because the solar energy, the wind energy that's available to make those are all here in New Mexico. And those are the type of investments and jobs we need to be looking for, not trying to chase the latest, greatest big company that will be here for a few years and then profit off of New Mexico's tax breaks and grant monies and then leave our state after capitalizing on those tax breaks to bring them here.
So this next question actually moves on to safety in New Mexico. What do you feel can be done to lower crime in a sustained and significant way?
I really appreciate the question because a couple of weeks ago I was in Albuquerque and had a home of family members in Albuquerque and had all of the contents of my car stolen. This was on my way to Santa Fe, and so I had a car with a lot of materials, and particularly from the driveway of that home had everything taken. It's not the first time that it's happened at a home in Albuquerque. It's not the first time that it's happened to me, and I've had the contents of my home here in Santa Fe when I've been staying here for the session entirely stolen as well too. The fact of the matter is that New Mexico's got to realize we're now the worst statistically. Albuquerque has the worst statistics of any city in the country for property crime, and we have one of the highest increases for crime. These crime rates make it hard for us to attract businesses here. And more important, it chases young families away from our state. As I told you before tonight, I have two daughters who are living in Albuquerque. They love New Mexico. They want to stay in New Mexico. But they've got to ask themselves, are they safe in New Mexico? Going to be safe to raise their families and their children here in New Mexico? And someday I hope to be a grandparent. I've got to ask myself, will this be a safe place in New Mexico? The fact of the matter is, though, that the governor of this administration has taken the entirely wrong approach. Her approach to crime has been increasing the maximum penalties, or at least trying to get the legislature to do so. But I'd like folks tonight to realize a couple of things. While Albuquerque and other cities in New Mexico may have some of the worst crime statistics in the country, frankly, in southern New Mexico, including Sunland Park, which I represent, and the city of Las Cruces, we have some of the best crime statistics in the entire country. Now, we all operate under the same state laws. We have the same maximum penalties in southern New Mexico, Las Cruces, Sunland Park, as in Albuquerque and elsewhere. And so we're operating under the same laws, and yet we have entirely different results. It should be evident to New Mexicans that the solution is not in greater penalties, but rather the solution lies in greater investment in law enforcement, to being able to capture people, to punish them, to swiftly do so, to invest in our court system, our justice system, and make sure that people that commit these crimes know with some certainty they're going to be caught and punished. The fact of the matter, in my own case, when my car was broken into a couple of weeks ago and the contents stolen, I filed a police report and was told the police wouldn't come out to investigate the crime because it wasn't worth their time or energy. And I was encouraged to simply file the report online. When later on, one of the individuals tried to cash a check that was as part of that, and we identified the person who tried to do so, once again, I was told that it wasn't a crime that would likely be followed because the amount was too inconsequential and too small. The criminals in our state know this. They know that they can get away with small crimes. They can do so repeatedly, and we need to change that thinking, that they can get away with these. The last thing is I'll add the sad story that we know of here in northern New Mexico that's taken place during this last session, where a 13-year-old boy was killed at the hands of a boyfriend of the boy's mother. And it's a tragedy and breaks our heart around the state to know this story. But more importantly, recognize that the individual who's accused of this crime has a long history of similar abuse, similar violent crimes, and probation and parole and release time and again. We begin to recognize that we know and predict that individuals like that who is accused of this crime of individuals who we can put away and assure that they're not going to be a threat and a risk to all New Mexicans, including our children.
Thank you. So this next question kind of follows up on that. This is from Herb, who is interested in the relationship between our drug and mental health problem. Herb wants to know, what kind of rehabilitation programs would you implement for drug abusers and also for those with mental illnesses?
So Herb does a good job of recognizing the correlation between mental illness and drug abuse. And I'll tell you that for too long in New Mexico, because we didn't have a place to offer the mental health care that's needed in our society, in our communities, too oftentimes we use the criminal justice system to handle that problem. And so, for example, we would use our jails and detention centers to house people who really, frankly, needed a different type of treatment and care altogether for mental health care. Now, drug use in New Mexico continues to be a problem as it is around the country, but the solution to drug use is not, again, by putting people in prison. And so I'm happy, again, to be running on a record in this case, not just promises. So I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, I was asked to carry a bill to decriminalize marijuana, possession in small quantities of marijuana in the state of New Mexico. Now, this had been tried by other legislators many times before, and failing to do so, they came to me and asked me to give a stab at it. And I did so. And so 2 years ago, I carried a bill to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. I did it because I had talked to judges and others and realized that they were spending too much of their time and energy, again, prosecuting and trying to administer these small possession marijuana cases. When I took on that task, a task that others had failed on many times before, I managed to pass the bill decriminalizing marijuana in the Senate. And I did so by one vote. Now when we see John McCain and others in Washington, D.C., and we see votes failing or passing by one vote, people begin to realize how difficult it is to pass legislation, particularly when it's that close. Now, the good news is this. Although I passed the first bill to decriminalize marijuana in the Senate 2 years ago by one vote, when I did it again this last year, we did so by over a dozen votes. And I did so this last session by bringing Republicans and Democrats in support of that legislation, both the House and the Senate, and getting it all the way to the House floor before trying to get it to the government. The point is, I like taking on hard challenges, and decriminalizing marijuana has been one, like opening conference committees, like whistleblower protection, like fraud against taxpayers, taking on bills that people don't believe can be done, by working hard to bring consensus and team building with my legislative colleagues to get it done. I've done it with decriminalizing marijuana, and I think that's the solution to New Mexico's drug problems, is recognizing it's not a criminal justice system. It's not about putting people in prison, but rather getting people treatment they need and to get off the drugs when they want to do so.
Thanks, Joe. So this next question moves on to some of the more marginalized communities in New Mexico. Riley asks, what is your message to the queer and transgender community regarding claims of harassment and discrimination?
So once again, as I've talked with you throughout the night, I'm going to have a record to run on in this race for the governor of New Mexico. And I'll be proud to tell you that I voted early in my career to protect the human rights under the Human Rights Act here in New Mexico of all organizations, groups, LGBTQ, people in our state who required and needed those protections. And we did so. New Mexico was one of the leaders in our state to provide those protections, and we did so in the Human Rights Act long before other states did. I'm going to be proud to tell you that when that bill came to the House floor, I worked with the sponsors to amend that bill on the floor to assure the protection of those communities in our New Mexico ahead of the rest of the country. And I'll tell you, even recently, this last session, when there was legislation introduced to deal with nursing compacts, one of the important issues in our committee process was to assure that although we would recognize the license for nurses from other states, that we wouldn't eliminate the protection of those nurses in New Mexico who would have those same rights in other states, or that those nurses from other states coming in New Mexico would have those same protections here. Look, I've been a lawyer for almost 30 years, and part of the great part of my pride and source of being a lawyer has been fighting fights against big companies, big corporations, and protecting people in need. And so I respect the law, I respect the fight, I respect our courts, and I respect the people who need to go to our courts and our justice system to protect those rights. And I'll continue to do so as governor and continue to fight those fights regardless of where they may be.
This next question is from Karen. Karen says, climate change and long-term drought are also hard challenges. What do you think states need to do to minimize these impacts?
Well, as I've been saying in Santa Fe, and I'll say tonight, that we keep talking about drought in New Mexico, and the fact of the matter is that it may not be really truly a drought. If we look back hundreds of years in the history of water in the state, the fact of the matter is that the rainfall that we see may be very normal. And it only may seem to be a drought when we compare it to exceptionally warm years in the 50s or the 60s. And so we need to begin to recognize that climate change is beginning to have an influence. This year, we see very little snow pack on our mountains here in northern New Mexico as I'm up here for the legislative session. That means there's going to be less water in our rivers, less water available around our state. New Mexico has got to be recognizing that we've got a plan for our water needs in the future because, frankly, without water, we're not going to be able to attract jobs. We're not going to be able to bring people to our state. We're not going to be able to sustain our existing economies in agriculture and our heritage as farmers. And more important, we're not going to be able to feel comfortable and safe about the quality of our life in New Mexico, knowing that our water is safe. And so I've been a leader on water issues. I've chaired the water committees in the state consistently. Today, on this last, chaired the water committee and right now I'm chairing the committee that is with water in New Mexico. What I will know and appreciate as the chairman of that committee, as a leader in the Senate on water issues, is frankly the fact that our state is in the middle of litigation against the state of Texas involving the federal government in Colorado. That litigation could result in damages claimed against the state as high as $1 billion and may require the state to deliver water to southern New Mexico from the part of the state. Our water litigation, our water needs, our fights with other states are going to be one of the most complicated tasks of the next governor, and I will be uniquely qualified to understand and tackle the challenges of water in our state compared to any other candidate running for governor.
Thanks, Joe. We have a question that comes up quite a bit, especially on Facebook. This one is from Lisa. What is your position on legalizing marijuana in New Mexico?
Well, I talked earlier in the night about the fact that I've led the fight to decriminalize marijuana successfully in our state, and I think that's a starting place. Look, I recognize that states in our country have gone full to legalize recreational marijuana. Right now, I don't believe that New Mexico is prepared to do that. And so I have not been an advocate for legalizing marijuana. However, if the proper bill and proper legislation with those safeguards reaches my desk as governor, then I will favorably entertain signing that legislation. But I'll tell you my issues. Like too many New Mexicans, I've lost loved ones, girlfriend, my college roommate, to drunk drivers in New Mexico. I have fought for the years that I've been here to try and strengthen our laws for DUI. We've had results. The fact of the matter is that we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the testing devices, we don't have the standards, we don't have the laws in place to assure that when we legalize marijuana in New Mexico, that we'll have the protection to people on our roadways and frankly to people in our place. I know we'll get there, I know other states will get there, but frankly even those that have legalized marijuana are struggling to try and make sure that they don't have people abusing those drugs when they're on the roadway and at work. And when I'm confident that we have those protections, then I think we're talking about recreational marijuana and legalizing that in New Mexico.
Thanks, Joe. So as we get to wrapping up tonight, we want to make sure we cover some of the questions that came about immigration. Dale asks, Joe, where are you on the border wall and DACA?
A terribly misguided attitude in Washington, D.C., and frankly, I'm somewhat disappointed even in our Democrat members of Congress because they've backed away from fighting the Trump administration on the issue of the wall and backing away from protection of DACA. Look, the fact of the matter is, and particularly those of us from southern New Mexico, we recognize that one of the greatest economic opportunities for our state is our border with Mexico. The fact of the matter is that across Santa Teresa, across the border on the Mexican side, 35,000 computers are manufactured every day across the border of Santa Teresa, and those 35,000 computers are shipped into the United States every day. There are enormous economic opportunities in our relationship with our neighbor, Mexico. And we're not going to further those relationships by, frankly, threatening to deport the young people who were born in this country, who were brought here by their parents. We're not going to further that relationship and those economic opportunities by talking about building a wall and then having Mexico pay for it. The fact of the matter is that our relationship with Mexico is strained under this administration. We need a governor who's going to be a champion for New Mexico and going to Washington, D.C. to promote the fact that our economic interests in New Mexico and frankly throughout the United States lie in greater trade opportunities with Mexico. We're doing it in New Mexico, and where we have tried it and worked at it, we've been successful. And so the idea of a bad relationship with Mexico, deporting DACA participants here in our state is not the approach to the economic opportunities presented in New Mexico. And frankly, important governor from New Mexico, particularly from our state, with our Hispanic population, our culture and heritage, should be a leader in advocating for diversity in our country and should be part of going to Washington, D.C. and helping this administration understand the importance of that diversity and not discriminating against people based on their origin, their immigration status, or frankly, the deplorable idea that we should be deporting people who were brought here as children, who don't know Mexico, who've raised their families here, educated themselves here, an important part of our community in New Mexico. We can show the rest of the country that diversity is an asset in New Mexico and not something to be feared.
So as we wrap up the night, this one is actually sent in by email from Cecilia. Cecilia says, I've received your emails regarding your platform. I pray that these are kept promises and the legislature does seriously look at these issues. I have to trust you and you seem genuine. But I do have to say, I'm keeping a record of your emails and promises, even though the real race hasn't begun yet. So let's just ask what every constituent wants to know from their candidates. Joe, how do you intend to keep the promises that you've made on the campaign trail?
I'm going to do so for the three reasons I started our evening tonight, which is frankly the fact that I believe in hard work, that I believe that there are no magic bullets and easy, quick fixes to our state problems, and more important, that what the next governor needs to have more than anything else is courage to do the right thing. So I'll make a commitment to you that I want you to follow my promises, but more important, you have to rely upon my promises. Unlike the other candidates who are running for governor in this race, you're going to have a record for my time here in and a record of my experience. And so whether it's protection of marginalized individuals in our state, whether it's immigration issues, whether it's water issues, whether it's air and water, any of the issues that we've discussed here tonight, including crime, and you'll be able to look at how I voted, how I led, the bills that I introduced, the things that I did to bring ethics and reform to our state of New Mexico. You won't have to rely upon kept promises or unkept promises. You'll be able to see what I've done with the opportunity that New Mexico has given me so far as a senator and as a member of the House of Representatives. And I want to give you an assurance that if you give me the opportunity to be your governor, I will take all of that history and all of that experience and all of that success as a legislator and bring that to the governor's office and do even more for more New Mexicans. That's the opportunity that I want from you tonight. That's the opportunity I'm asking you to give me. And that's the opportunity that you can give as a promise to New Mexico if you vote for Joe Cervantes for governor.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in and submitting your questions. And of course, thank you, Senator Cervantes, for your time. And we look forward to hearing more from you.
Great. I hope you'll follow our webpage. I hope you'll get in touch with me, check our email, and continue to let us know what issues are important to Mexicans, and I'll respond.
Thanks. You can also catch on Twitter at @SenJoeCervantes and on Facebook at Cervantes for NM. Good night.
Good night. Thank you for joining us.